We'll go through the papers now, shall we? But we've got Marianne Hood here and Tom Slater. They're joining us. We haven't got our list. We don't know what you're talking about yet.
No, we've got a list in.
Pages.
Who's starting us off?
Well, we can tell you.
Yeah,
we tell you? Okay, so do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Shall I go first?
Why not?
I'll do. Okay, the Telegraph front page.
You should have got in quicker there, Tom. Go on.
We should follow the script, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we haven't got one.
We haven't. No, we haven't.
Coming up later.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the COVID inquiry and the scope of the inquiry, and it was currently out to consultation, and basically this is a story on the front of the Telegraph that's saying that the original scope of the investigation was not going to include the impact of the pandemic and of course all the measures that were taken to protect us from the worst of it, the impact on children and young people. But there have been lots of representations to the consultation period saying, hang on a minute, we really need to look at this, not just the impact of coronavirus, but particularly the impact of the lockdowns, the school closures, what the impact on mental health, well-being, long-term consequences, safeguarding. Of course, we had those awful cases of little Star and Arthur, who both were murdered at home after weeks and weeks of being tortured and abused, possibly partly because they were less in sight than they would have been if they'd been at school in childcare, if people had sort of more ability to move around and be outside the home. And so it's now hopefully going to become part of the scope of this inquiry, because whatever you think about the lockdown this time, COVID-19 probably won't be the last time we face this kind of global pandemic issue, and so we need lessons learned, better practice for the next time we have to roll out these protocols.
Yeah, fair point, I think.
And also not rolling out some of the ones that we did, I think, is one thing that we could learn from this, because it was clear from very early on that obviously coronavirus wasn't a threat to young people themselves. Obviously they could pass it on to loved ones and all the rest of it. But the effect of something like school closures, we're going to be feeling that for decades to come. You know, you take a child out of school for a few months, it can have a really big impact given how quickly they're developing and all the rest of it. And as you were saying there, Marianne, also in terms of the kind of other benefits, keeping an eye on kids, making sure they're all right, making sure that there's nothing going on at home.
Because not every home is a happy home, is
exactly.
it?
No.
And you're asking people to be locked down at home. It clearly was a real problem for some families, wasn't it?
Let's have a word about Partygate, Tom, in the Mirror.
It's not gone away as a story. So this is Downing Street reaching the landmark of 100 fines for the various different parties. So a further 50 FPNs, fixed penalty notices, have been issued in relation to one of the Downing Street parties. We should say this isn't one that either Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak or any kind of top-flight politicians were at, but their advisors and civil servants were, and it just being presented as a bit of a landmark. I can't be the only one who's probably tired of this at this point, given everything else that's going on in the world. Obviously everyone found this infuriating, one rule for them, one rule for us, but it does become a point where we need to move on. I feel like Partygate, Beergate, whatever the next gate is, at this point we just need to draw a line under it all, surely.
It does, interestingly though, make number 10 Downing Street the most fined place.
It does,
doesn't it, over
which is quite a kind of, especially when you think about the amount of scorn that was being poured on ordinary people for going to the beach or sitting on a park bench. I mean, the day of the big, BYOB party in the Downing Street Garden, you had them going on television saying that you can meet one person outside, Boris Johnson encouraging people to, call the police if they see large groups in parks, and yet this is what was going on. It is outrageous, even if it is a bit long in the tooth, this story.
It makes me massively depressed, but I don't want us to forget, because that's exactly what they want us to do. Going, move on, look, there's a war in Ukraine, the Northern Ireland protocol's all in tatters. Yeah, but it's not just people who missed out going to the beach to have an ice cream with their mates. It was people who missed holding hands of their loved ones in their dying days or hours. It's people who missed funerals. It's people who missed opportunities that really were
But what do we do?
hugely important.
Do we keep kicking people? Because it now, obviously,
Well, if it's the Prime Minister who wrote the law, we keep kicking him till he goes, because it's unacceptable.
Well, what about
that
Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner then?
Well, they haven't been found guilty yet. I mean, guilty, I know people always pull me up on social media going, no, it's not guilty because it's not a criminal offence. I understand, but what I mean in the common parlance rather than a legal definition, he did a wrong thing and he's been fined by the police, that kind of guilty.
But we
can't just move on and go, oh, well, it happened a long time ago.
But we're in a position then when we could lose the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, on what you're saying, as well as potentially the Labour Party leader and deputy leader. I mean, that'd be a political freefall.
I think it is a bit silly. I mean, a country in which, you know, your Prime Minister and your leader of the opposition could go because they had a bit of cake and curry, respectively. I just don't think it's a serious country. The problem is this is what lockdown turned us into. It turned us into all potential criminals. It turned us into kind of scolds. I think the way that they can draw a line under this is just to say that everyone who has been given those fixed penalty notices, especially if they were doing nothing. I mean, there was one man who was fined because he was grieving and 3 of his friends popped round to see if he was okay. He was issued with an FPM. So I think an amnesty for all those people, and then we could possibly move on from there.
That's a good idea.
That is a good idea.
No, he's got to go.
Can we talk? Can we talk about ambulance wait times?
Oh, yes.
Because they're bad, aren't they?
They're really bad, you know, just for a bit of light relief.
Yeah, I know.
You know, the terrible situation of the NHS falling apart. Obviously, spring, summer is normally a time of year when some of the pressures on the NHS are a little bit reduced. We don't have that burden of people getting flu in the winter, that kind of thing. However, the NHS is on its knees. Urgent 999 ambulance attendance, so the point where someone's bleeding arterially, your child is choking and is turning blue. An ambulance should reach your address within 7 minutes. At the moment, it's 9 minutes and 2 seconds. So the target is 7 minutes. 7 minutes is a hell of a long time to wait. 9 minutes is potentially between life and death, or between a kind of a slightly more positive outcome and something that is life-changingly bad. For serious calls,
Like a heart attack.
like a heart attack or a stroke, so like really serious, people are having to wait for 51 minutes on average.
Terrible.
And the head of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, a woman called Catherine Henderson, was on record in an interview saying, "It is terrible. It's never been this bad. I would consider what my options are for getting a loved one to emergency care." And the interviewer said, "You mean like getting a taxi?" And she was like, "Well, yeah." The point at which the head of the emergency medicine college is saying, "I'd considered driving them myself or putting someone in a taxi because they're having a heart attack, or I think they've had a stroke." I mean, what planet do we live on? It's absolutely depressing. And obviously the impact on those doctors, those nurses, those paramedics who know they can't do their job properly, they can't serve the public. It has huge psychological damage for them, because it traumatises them, because they know that they've sort of failed us, even though it's not their fault.
It's not their fault, no. But it's worrying
and so
stuff.
they'll leave the service because they can't. It's not sustainable, isn't it?
Let's hope they don't.
The only one thing I would add is that, because it happened in my family many moons ago, we had an emergency, and my father made up his mind that it would be quicker to drive my little sister to hospital than wait for an ambulance. The only thing you can't do if you're driving it yourself or a taxi, you can't go through red lights. You can't put on a sign. That's why it's often better to wait for the ambulance, because the ambulance can take shortcuts and treat you en route as well. He found that her life was seriously compromised by the fact that he'd chosen to drive her in a car, because he had to stop at lights and got stuck in traffic and stuff like that. So, you know, you've got to weigh these things up really carefully, I'd say.
Grim, isn't it? Right, we're out of time, you two, but we will see you a little bit later. Tom, Mary Ann, thank you for more fun.
For more fun.
Yeah, get some lighter stuff for next
Sorry.
hour.
Yes, we want some funnies.
Dear me. Look, don't go anywhere, because coming up, we're going to be talking about a High Court judge deciding on whether to turn off the life support for a 12-year-old. We're going to talk to his mum and sister in a couple of minutes.